Welcome to episode number 2 of our efforts to add content to our YouTube channel. If you'll recall, when we last joined each other in March, we were going for first episode and potentially calling these sessions, not podcast adjacent. But we decided, as fun as that is, it didn't have HR in the title. So we are now going to be titling this series of videos, however long we go, as Uncomplicating HR, which is surely consistent with our vision of HR done differently. So welcome
Absolutely.
to episode number 2.
Well, thank you.
I think you get the chair first because you wanted to ask me some questions about
I
the modern day
did.
workplace to kick it off. So let's go. I'm ready.
Yeah, last week we were kicking around, things that are changing and moving. And I know that we talked a little bit about just a variety of different things that impact our workplace now that maybe didn't impact our workplace before. But I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, what do you see shaping the new modern day workplace? What is it that is the new? What is it that is the different than in your perspective and what you're seeing out there?
Well, technology changing every week certainly doesn't hurt to make every week
AI.
different than the week before. So there's certainly a technology push in the modern day workplace. But in particular for the CEO groups I've been lucky enough to be a part of over the last several years, and certainly within our client community, there is a new guard, so to speak, of leadership coming in that has become, in my opinion, far more aware of how tight the labor market is than some of the leaders who've been around for a while. If you remember when you and I, dating ourselves a little here, Val, be prepared, when you and I first started to even dabble in personnel, which is now HR, it was employer, what do they call it? The employer market, when there's far more people than jobs. So you get to be really picky. And that's how I was HR trained for a while. I remember the first time I was trained on recruiting from an executive recruiter. It was great training. And I don't know if this still doesn't apply, but you do everything you can to knock the candidate out of the box. Like the candidate has to jump through all of these hoops all the time to prove they fit, they belong. And even now, knowing, love it or hate it, we're DEI, the DEI movement took us for a minute. Do everything possible to knock them out of the box. It sounds about right because you make a big investment in your employees, but it's also so negative, right? I mean, we really have gone through a period of time where I know you and I don't care for disciplinary action. We like corrective action. I sure don't care for probationary period. I like to call it an introductory period where there's mutual collaboration to set people up for success. And now, it's no longer a personnel manual. It's an employee handbook. Some people have even moved from employee handbook to employee guidebook. And there's a lot of conversations about how do we make it more employee friendly and not so legalese. And it's this slow migration, I think, of younger leaders more interested in culture. But at the same time, it's been paired with, we got to do more to attract and keep talent because we have more jobs than available talent at this point. And didn't you and I actually see a reputable study from an economist who I believe I heard speak at maybe a Richmond Sherm event a few years ago, even with evolving technology and AI and people worried that AI is going to replace humans, between now and 25 years from now, based on population growth, we still are not going to have enough humans for the jobs that are going to be available, right? Didn't you and I study that a couple of years ago?
Yeah. I mean, we've had some studies, but it also, part of that whole equation was, the workforce is just different. As you said before, it was people wanting to get into an organization and then staying loyal and staying with that organization for long term. So, once you got settled into a company that you were comfortable at, it was easy to stay. But, through the 80s and into the 90s, people figured out that they could expedite their career progression by moving their ladder from company to company. So instead of working up the ladder, they realized, well, I can go here and gain these skill sets and here in these skill sets. And, I evolved in my HR recruiting from worried about whether or not somebody was job hopping to whether or not they had measurable success and good learns that they could bring to our organization, and hoping that they're going to stay for a few years and not necessarily holding it against them that they were making those moves, because nobody was sitting still anymore. And we're certainly in that
That's
environment,
certainly
to your
still
point.
true today.
Yeah, as you were saying, now it's not a buyer's market anymore when it comes to bringing employees on board. It's more, how do you sell yourself in your leadership? And you commented on culture. It absolutely, now there is, whether because of that shift in loyalties and the change in the amount of available skills or available candidates out in the workplace, people now want to align with a culture and an ethics and an environment that they're comfortable with. They've come to realize, I think, that they spend so much time at work that it impacts them personally, and they want some kind of personal investment in that. As you were talking through what you're seeing changing, that kind of resonates for me, is that people really want somewhere that is fostering them. They're not afraid to leave if they're not getting growth, and that becomes incumbent upon the employers to continue to challenge people in some way. If you're too flat and you don't have promotions available, the question still comes back to whether or not somebody's learning and growing and or just happy and content. If they're not getting growth, are they at least getting mental well-being and psychological safety?
Right.
And things that we never really had in our vocabulary in the early 80s. It wasn't the topic to worry about.
Well, you know what? And to that point too, and I have two extra thoughts. Don't let me forget about them, because I want to actually ask. I want to ask you about things you and I heard around the workplace from leaders 20 years ago that we don't hear today. But a question I have for you is, modernizing, progress, evolution, all of these things, and then being able to do hindsight is 2020 and reflecting back. I don't even know if there's any data on this, but I think about this for some of the companies that are still hanging on to, like the utility companies, hanging on to employees for 20, 25, 30 years. A lot of them, I'm hanging around because of the golden handcuffs, and these are still some of the rare entities that have a pension waiting for these employees. Do we have any reason to believe that the majority of people that stay at a company for 30 years really have, on the averages, a high level of engagement and productivity for all 30 years? So you think about it, employees want to jump to gain new skills, new experiences, and a lot of them still think grass is greener on the other side. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. That's a gamble you take when you leave a job and a culture that you think you like, and then you take grass is greener and you realize you actually like that job better than you thought you did, and you've already left. But what about the employer side of this? Did you any thoughts as to whether or not there should be some level of skepticism that a 30-year strong employee had, a third of those years where they just were getting to the finish line? They were just getting to the finish line. That's it.
I'm sure there is a percentage of the workforce that is just getting to the finish line. They worked hard, they grew, they went up the ladder, they found their place. But there may be, on their path to retirement and path to, stopping their career. I'm sure there's a percentage of that.
But what do you have a sense of? Because back when you and I started, this was still a thing. I'm pretty sure you and I started around the same time, and this whole idea of pensions going away, and even now this whole creative thing of, okay, maybe we'll do a 401k, but really we'd like to do some creative things even with a 401k that don't cost the company as much money, so that we have the compensation dollars to actually pay more in salary to be competitive in the marketplace for talent.
Right. Well, and where I was going with that was that, there's that percentage, but I think there's a remainder of the workforce that, benefits and compensation are definitely holding them there because they see the instability with other institutions that aren't as strong. But then I also see a component of that being people that have made themselves invaluable to the organization because of the institutional knowledge that they hold. And whether or not organizations are looking at all three of those aspects, I mean, for those people that are just just finishing their career. I mean, they still have value. They're still productive. Are they necessarily your A players? Not necessarily, but are they consistent, reliable, and are they doing their job?
They do have a
Okay,
lot of
so that
historical
rewards
intellectual
them.
capital. I'll give them
Right.
that. They should.
Yes. So you reward them, you reward them with that mutual respect and loyalty. For the ones that have all that institutional knowledge that are invaluable to the organization, are you leveraging those people for mentoring and growing the next generation? We had that great, dance with mentorship there for a while, but it's kind of faded back down,
It
I
has.
think.
Even in SHRM, right? I don't even
it's
see it coming out of SHRM anymore. Be a mentor to younger
Right.
people.
And I've participated in some of those
Me
with
too.
mentoring other HR, professionals as they grow up, which was not something we had when we were coming up through the 80s. But, I do question whether or not organizations realize that they're not curating a really professional workforce because they're not providing that mentorship and that role modeling. And so
Yeah.
I do see a component there that kind of is concerning. And then when it comes to compensation, like I already said, you have a component there that's there because they see that the grass is not necessarily greener. There is more instability in most organizations. The organizations that we thought would never fail are no longer the organizations that will never fail. And so, without getting into politics, that even extends into the federal government right now, where a lot of people thought was a safe way to, still work and grow, but, had some stability. So there's a lot of instability in different industries now that we just never expected before.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do question whether or not organizations are leveraging that. My son's in the workforce, and just even today, he sent me a video of kind of some unprofessional behavior that had gone viral at his organization that from managers, and I looked at it, and it wasn't horribly inappropriate or anything to that effect, but it was
Still surprising though.
not managers.
Yeah.
And what I saw was a younger, inexperienced staff that has not had someone there to role model, how you spend your time. And it's conflicting. I mean, there's things out there now like TikTok and 50 other million social media sites where you can post content and get engagement for your organizations and show that we're a fun business, which, that's always been a challenge. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And I really do see that there's a lack of mentorship and guidance and role modeling for newer managers in the organization. So.
Do you ever find when you go shopping, like sometimes you've been in HR so long you just can't help it, and I really am a champion for this future generation. I think they have wonderful traits and skills that can be leveraged in the modern day workplace. But again, back to the lack of mentorship, and I hate to keep blaming COVID, but let's face it, there are workers in the workplace right now that chose not to go to college, which is fine. And they lost some level of social skills development that would have translated over into an understanding of how to professionally conduct themselves. So I'm at this major retailer a few weeks ago. Thankfully, all lines were open because in Virginia, if you have more than 10 items, you can't do self-checkout anymore. So it's been interesting to watch this migration of some of these major retailers that have chosen this, that have now said, okay, well, we were counting on self-checkout for a period of time, so we weren't hiring cashiers. Now, if you have more than 10 items, you can't go through self-checkout, so now we're back to hiring cashiers, which, for new to the workplace and good with customers, by all means, have them be a cashier. But here's where I got almost sad, or I wished I could just pushed my cart aside and stood next to this young man for like an hour of his shift. He didn't know any better, so I've just met this young man. Of course, I'm friendly. I say, how's your day going? Pretty good. And he's checking out my items and putting them in the bag. And I said, it's been a long, because it was like 5 o'clock. It's like, been a long day. He's like, oh yeah, I've been here since 8 o'clock. No lunch break. I mean, he just kind of like, we barely know each other. He doesn't know what I do or who I am. Not that I'm some kind of big deal, but I'm like, I'm taking this in like, look what this employee who I've never met before is telling me. He's been there since 8 o'clock. This is what he tells me. It's almost 5 o'clock. He's had no lunch break, which, that's fine. If you're over the age of 18 in the state of Virginia, you're not required to give them a meal break. I'm not saying that's not a good idea. Or I'm not saying that's a good idea, but it's lawful, right? But here's where he went with it. He said, I hope to keep this schedule up. Honestly, I need the money, but I was just told, they're cutting my hours, they're changing my schedule, and here, this is what he says to me, quote unquote, here we go again, finding a way to work for a company that nickels and dimes its employees, and everybody in the ivory tower in the corporate office gets richer and richer off us. Which, look, I get capitalism and the perception of corporate America. He might not be wrong, but why are you telling that to a customer who's just checking out that you just met? And this is what I mean about the mentoring, right? These kids grew up, they're young people now entering the workforce, and they didn't have like that social skills, professionalism, fine tuning that sometimes we depend on public school for, or certainly some sort of evolution of their maturing. And then social media, where they think everything they say all the time must be said to the world all the time. And now you're throwing them into these workplaces where, to your point, some of these managers don't even know how to professionally guide some of these younger people. And this is what we're ending up with. Yeah.
And I'm going to throw a devil's advocate out there too, though. I mean, we very briefly said the word culture, leadership, and mentorship for a second, but we are in an age now where transparency is everything. There's no.
And I love it. I always
There's no
have led with
walking it back. It's
Yeah.
not going to go back to, not talking about things. So I from a devil's advocate standpoint, I think what really resonates for me there is if that employee felt that the company cared about them, that bothered to say, holy moly, you've been working for 9 hours on your feet, dealing with a lot of stress, go take a break.
Right.
If there was that healthy relationship on, customer service, but then understanding that your employees are a service, then it's easier to expect it's consideration to put out there to expect an employee to say, well, it's not appropriate to talk about these things. I mean, if you're being treated badly these days, there's no filter out there to not tell people I'm being treated badly. There is potentially encouragement to have those conversations appropriately with managers or peer, the chain that you're supposed to be having that conversation with.
Sure.
And the customer service, understanding that customer service does not mean dragging your customers into a problem, because that's not what people go shopping for, right?
Right.
But if we're going to have that expectation for them, then we need to have a culture that supports that and gives them reason to refrain from making those comments and reason to understand that it's not in the best interest of their own job and the organization that they work for to be, venting to customers as they come through the line.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think my devil's advocate to that is if you treat your people better and then ask them to understand that they're not just venting, they're imposing on someone, and it's not good customer service. And actually,
I would be willing to bet, based on my interaction with that young man, if somebody had bothered to just tell him, he seemed dedicated enough and wanting to work there enough that you could have easily reasoned with him and say, we understand why you're feeling that way, but here's how it lands from the customer's perspective and why you probably shouldn't say that. And again, teaching at that young age, what we've often talked about lately on our team in terms of where we're starting to understand culture and employee relations and leader to employee interactions. There's a difference between intent and impact.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Absolutely.
So as we round out modern day workplace and before we jump over to new employee onboarding, what comes to mind to you in terms of signs that a company is in pursuit of being a modern day workplace? Because this is the infinite game. There you go. There's my Simon Sinek drop for this session. But during understanding that the work is never really done to be a modern day workplace, because society is always morphing and changing and evolving. And we're hiring people who live among our society and all have different lived experiences and different backgrounds. What are the things you would say we know, particularly with new clients that join us, that tell us they've either attempted to plant a flag in the modern day workplace and are working at it, or they actually come to us because they want to be a modern day workplace and leverage culture as a competitive advantage, and they don't even know where to start? What are some of the things we see?
A couple things. I mean, I see the organizations that are really starting to embrace modern day workplace split out between the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain, meaning they're starting to engage that AI and tech automation, understand how to refine those positions, understanding how to better market, how to better leverage productivity and efficiency. But I think the ones that are looking on the other side of the brain and looking at the human component, they're starting to understand and appreciate the importance of well-being. I mean, that example that we just talked about with the young man at the grocery store, that's someone whose mental health is probably struggling in that moment. That's a level of frustration and stress, and they're looking for an outlook, and they were invited into a conversation, so they're just letting it all go, right? So I'm seeing organizations that are starting to embrace and approach a modern day workplace with how do we ease frustration and remove barriers through the use of tech, but then how do we do better? How do we manage our people better, and how do we treat our people better? And then use all that information combined to better market themselves and better research.
Sure.
I mean, we're going to talk about onboarding in a minute, and because we had already decided we're going to do that. But if an organization has taken the time to grab those job descriptions and actually spend time working on them and spend time developing something that is accurate and meaningful and using that to market themselves and hire, then that's to me a modern day workplace that wants to really, use the whole life cycle of the employee.
Right. Yeah.
The right hiring process, the right we'll talk about onboarding, but the right performance management process and the right, churn with their employees.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think vision, I'm a big fan of vision, mission, and values. That's not anything I even heard about. Like when I was started to get promoted up into leadership positions, even for as much as I knew about HR then, and started to become a better and better leader, because that's even a craft you have to fine tune. Vision, mission, values, and how they become a part of your culture. It's like, I don't know how new it is, last 5 years, last 10 years. Talk to me a little bit about your impressions of how that's come about in terms of an element of a modern day society. Where are you seeing that present itself?
Well, in the terms of HR, I think we've always talked very passionately about business planning and being credible business planners. In the world of HR, I see maybe some growth in that people are starting to understand that HR is part of that business plan, and HR has its own business plans. And the evolution of aligning a company's mission and vision into those business plans, and all the way down back to that, I said job descriptions, all the way down to that job description, so that people actually see what their day-to-day contributions are doing to affect the business. I mean, when as organizations talk about mission, vision, and values, it really is about who are you in the organization? Positively or negatively, how are you affecting the operations and the bottom line? And when people, I think modern day workforces are starting to understand that if people understand fully their expectations and understand fully the best practices that an organization wants you to take so that you can achieve the long-term vision and the long-term the long-term plans of the organization, people do a better job of self-managing to that.
Totally true.
I mean, people don't,
Yep.
I've said this for decades, people don't wake up in the morning, get out of bed, and say, hey, I think I'm going to screw up at work today. Nobody does that, right? People get up
No,
and
not unless they know HR's called and said, hey, we need to
Oh,
talk to you at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, unless they're a little salty and they have some, and they have that day coming out ahead of them. If there's they
My
wake up
favorite.
salty.
I need to talk to you at 3 o'clock. What's that about? Well, we'll tell you when we get here. And
exactly,
like, oh, great,
right.
I'm getting fired. Yeah.
Yeah, but nobody actually plans to fail in their job. It's not what people do. So what I see with modern day workplaces that are really starting to understand the importance of mission and vision, and understand that HR and the people within their organization are part of the business plan, is that they're being more careful to ensure that the employees actually understand how each and every act during their day, each and every task and each and every outcome that they have how it impacts the organization. People really will self-manage better when they have all the information. And, we went through this whole trend coming out of the 90s on people want the why, not just the how. And this reflects that. If people understand why they're doing things, they're less likely to paint that negative narrative. And, Kim on our team, has so fabulously really kind of embedded that reminder to us that when people have an absence of information, they will create a negative narrative. And I think we all knew that, but it's really become kind of permeated now, our understanding of what's happening when we're talking with our clients. So I think in a modern day workplace, people are starting to understand the absence of information and the lack of transparency, but then also the lack of consideration all wrapped together. It's going to give you the negative results. It's going to impact your bottom line. And
I can't help but, at a very simplistic level, connect the dots from way back when I got my first leader job and had an opportunity to really kind of look and see, why is this benefits department always complained about? And what am I prepared to do about it? And I was blown away that there were members of that benefits department that, yes, was problematic for a period of time. They had no idea how the company made money. No one ever explained to them how new clients were priced. And when I say make money, it's not just what's on the invoices. And you don't have to get detailed, but some general understanding of, this is how we invoice clients. This is how sales prices clients. This is how we invoice clients. That's revenue. This is how we calculate gross margin, which is the cost of, what it takes to deliver the thing, the service. And then there's a profit margin. And again, in the absence of information, you think about people that complain about, well, here I am, I'm not getting a raise, but everybody else on the leader team is getting rich. In the absence of information, that's what you would assume, but that's not always the case. So until you start explaining some of this to employees on a very general level, you're right. They will connect their own negative narrative, maybe make some false assumptions, but also, to your point, have no path in their brain whatsoever on how their work contributes to revenue or expenses or profit margin or any of those important measures of a business to understand its financial health. So, yeah. Good stuff. Yeah. Maybe what do I want to close with a modern day workplace? Something fun. What are we going to do about these micromanagers that continue to linger in the workforce? So how do we, for anybody who is self-aware to say, I'm a micromanager and I know that needs to change and I don't know how to stop. What's some advice you would give?
I would argue, personally, that at least half of micromanagers out there, not all, but maybe half.
50-50.
50-50. Let's just say that. This is my own fake number, but let's say that, because it's not all micromanagers. But I would argue that many micromanagers have a need to control and micromanage because they're not either well organized or as effective communicators as they think they are.
Sure.
What I tend to find with micromanagers is that they're less likely to delegate because there's not clear process in place. There's not good documentation. And or if it's maybe let's say it's project management where you're asking somebody to do something and then, you end up micromanaging it the whole way or taking it back for that matter. What I have seen in the workplace with those types of situations is that they didn't have the whole vision laid out. It couldn't accurately articulate the different benchmarks along the way and the outcomes. And so they see people struggling to meet what's in their mind where things should be. Mm-hmm. And they're maybe also lack that communication skill to help people along to paint the vision and get them where they need to be. And one of two things ends up happening. The employee fails or the manager just takes it back and says, I'll just do it.
Yeah. Not my favorite choice.
It's the worst. I mean, it's the worst. It's if you're looking to destroy somebody's engagement and motivation and self-esteem, do that. Right. Just definitely take it back if that's your goal. If you have taken the time to actually plan and organize well and document and think ahead to what needs to happen and when it needs to happen, delegating and not micromanaging becomes so much more plausible. Because now you can paint the picture and you don't feel like you have to be there every point of the way because something isn't in their knowledge set. And if you've taken the time to be that organized and communicate that clearly, you'll know that they're going to hit things that they don't know how to work with yet. And either you know at what point do you need to do some training to set them up for success on the next step or in the next part of their growth, or you need to understand that they know what the end result goal is, and you have to let them do it their way.
And back to my point on technology, as you know, with technology, you're going to write an SOP, so to speak, on how to do something, and it involves technology. I bet there's 5 different ways to do that one thing inside the technology you're prescribing.
Ways.
Yeah.
And so the other half of the micromanagers, and just touched on it, fall to, that's not the way I do it. And unless there is a very specific why that will change the outcomes as to why you do something a certain way, micromanagers have to stop and understand that even if their way might seem better, or maybe it is better, it's not better for that person.
Right.
So
it's good advice. We live that internally sometimes. Yeah. I'll call, Jennifer Archer, part of our team, part of the leader team, your colleague for a long time.
Yep.
Amazing. Certainly not a micromanager, but I'll put a little humor into this, to the point you just made. There are times when Jemmy and I are screen sharing, and she's trying to show me something, or I'm trying to show her something. She loves keystrokes to do stuff. I don't. I'm a mouse user. I'm a right-click on the mouse user. And sometimes it almost becomes funny because early on in our relationship, she'd be like, just do it this way. Something having to do on something with control something or other on the keyboard. I have never worked in Microsoft Word or Excel that way. Now, because of her, you can no longer see the C or the V on my keyboard because over a time I just gave up. And I'm like, fine, I'll do Control C and Control V. And in certain instances I like it, but my default is right-clicking on the mouse.
Yeah,
but we had these sessions where it just became funny, where I'm like, just let me right-click. I already know that you know a keystroke for this, but I'm going to right-click. Just live with it. So, yeah.
And it's, and what that really paints is, it's just a humorous example of 2 people that are completely competent and able to do it all by themselves and will ultimately both have fantastic results, but you want to do it one way and they want to do it another way, and
it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay. Nothing's going to get broken. So
yeah. I mean, it's fun.
This actually likens sometimes to my favorite phrase, which is known as transplanting organs around here. It's really okay. Right. Don't spend energy on those little minuscule differences. So
yeah. So there's my answer on people that micromanage. You either don't have the systems and the information and the knowledge shared in a way that it needs to be shared in order for that person to be successful, or you're just not letting go of your old job. That's part of it, and letting go of the fact that they're not you. And they're not necessarily going to do things the way you want to do things.
And I would remind people that if you are really in it for the long term and you're playing the long game in a leadership role, and certainly if you're the business owner, even if it's uncomfortable to you and it requires longer to delegate it out, it is in your best long-term interest to delegate to people. Otherwise, you're limiting their developmental opportunities, and you're going to be stuck doing that thing and 1,000 other things all the time.
Which
means you're not taking care of self, you're not taking care of the business, and you are not serving the people you employ well either. So
yeah, that was always our tagline in my prior jobs. If you're not busy growing other people, then you are not growing yourself.
Right.
Because you cannot move forward if you can't let go.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely one of the things that will stall people the worst, or the most.
Particularly when the list is huge, you're overwhelmed, and so your experience is, I might delegate it eventually, but I don't have time right now. I don't have time to write down the SOP.
You'll never have time.
which, by the way, there's some great free technology out there that will record you on screen, and there's your SOP.
Right.
So
Do it this way.
I get it. I mean, you know us. We have like 18-page SOPs that we're trying to pare down right now because I was just always an SOP person. But this whole idea of I can't stop and take the time to create an SOP with all
You
the
have to.
technology out there that allows for easy, quick screen share, I don't know if that's a decent obstacle anymore.
If you don't stop and set yourself up for an easier future, you will never get out of the cycle. I
Well, there you
have said
go.
that a million times. I've told people, let one of the lower hanging fruit balls drop. Let it drop and focus on this other thing that's going to make the entirety of next week go smoother.
Yep.
Just
Totally
choose your fail. Choose what to fail on to make everything more successful.
True.
And that, it goes a long way.
The other thing, I know we could talk, it sounds like we could talk forever about modern day workplace, but I will actually close with this because we've talked about this on our team, and I think for people who are interested in learning more about this, I think they should know this. When you're talking about micromanagers, particularly if you're the business owner, if you're coming across as controlling for a period of time, we get it. And remember, I think I posted about this on Teams a couple of weeks ago, where sometimes it amazes us how controlling some people are, even though they've said they don't want to be. And then I remembered my own journey as a business owner and where the emotion of being a business owner comes from sometimes, and we can be our own worst enemies. Sometimes we're controlling because we're in a place of fear. Starting a small business, which often requires
Terrifying.
taking investment capital, a loan, cashing out your 401k, investing family dollars, we always believe that in ourselves that we can do it. And in all likelihood, you can. But there are always moments that are hard in a small business where you get really nervous, where you have this flash of, I have to make this work. I invested all of our family money in this. And you tend to fall victim to that emotional fear, which contributes sometimes. But it's all fixable. You just surround yourself with the right people that help you, coach you out of that mentality for a period of time. And I promise you that fear and that desire to control, it will tamp down over a period of time.